the gig is up. The fire was burning all night, and I know you didn't go down the chimney. Now please, tell me the truth about Christmas.
Okay, young lady, since you asked, after this there's no turning back. You take the blue pill and you can go back to sleep. You wake up tomorrow morning and believe anything that you want to believe. If you take the red pill, I'll tell you what Christmas is all about. It's your choice. Now remember, all I'm offering you is the truth, nothing more. Okay, we don't have much time. To tell you the truth about Christmas, I have to take you all the way back to Mount Sinai. When Israel came out of Egypt, we were taken to Mount Sinai, where the Almighty shouted down His commandments to us in telling us how He wanted to be worshiped. He told us that if we would keep His commandments, whatever they were, that we would be His priest, we would be His prophets, we would be His representatives to the whole world. And so when we agreed, He then gave us 10 statements to remember all of His commandments by. The very first statement that He made, He says that I am Yahweh, your Elohim, which brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And He did it in a very miraculous way, as you remember. The parting of the Red Sea, all the plagues that came upon Egypt. He brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand, and He said that He wants no other gods, no other Elohim, no other fake gods like the Egyptians had in His face. He went on to say that He didn't want to even hear the names of other gods come out of our mouth. He further stated that He told us, do not learn the way of the heathen. Do not learn how the heathen worship and serve their gods and do the same thing and say we're doing it to Him, because to Him it is an abomination. For the heathen have even made their children sacrifices to other gods. They literally, the heathen, the pagan, would incinerate their children on the altars of pagan gods in part of the worship service. He said, have nothing ever to do with that. And so, after receiving the commandments, we wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. We camped at 42 camping sites before going into the land that was promised to Abraham. And just as we were in the land of the Moabites, we were then taken to the mountain there at Moab, and another covenant was made with us. Then it was not exactly like the covenant that was made at Sinai. This time, all of the children of Israel, including those foreigners, those Gentiles who joined themselves to Israel, were brought to this mountain, and we were again instructed, when we cross over the Jordan River, over into the land of the Canaanites, that we are to expunge every last vestige of pagan sun god worship out of the land. And if we didn't do it, we would get thrown out of the land. Now, we were in the land of Moab. The land of Moab is right next to the land of the Ammonites. The Moabites worshipped Molech, a cast iron, pot-bellied god. The Ammonites worshipped Chemosh, who is a pot-bellied, cherry-red god. And over in the land of the Canaanites, they too worship Tammuz. And the amazing thing is, young lady, is that these gods were all worshipped at the time of the winter solstice. On the ancient Babylonian calendar, before the precession of the equinoxes, Molech, Chemosh, and Tammuz were all worshipped on the same day, December 25th, which was the time of the winter solstice on the ancient Babylonian calendar. Now, we wonder, okay, the Ammonites, the Moabites, and the Canaanites all worshiped a god that was born on December 25th. How can that possibly be? Their gods were all named different names. Well, in order to understand that, I have to take you one step back further into Babylon. Now, in Babylon, which is the plain of Shinar, we go back to the time, close to the time after the flood. And one of Noah's great-great-grandsons' name was Nimrod. Nimrod was a mighty man. He was a hunter. And he was a man who set up the city of Babylon as a nation, and Nimrod was worshipped as a god. Nimrod began to build a city, and they began to build a tower to reach to the Most High, and it was Nimrod who started this one world government system in which he was worshipped as a god. Everyone had to obey him. It was a political, it was an economic, it was a religious world system that he bore totalitarian rule over the entire earth because everyone spoke the same language. And so everyone was under Nimrod's control. But one of Noah's righteous sons, and according to tradition, this could have been Shem, it could have been one of Shem's descendants, Shem, the son of Noah, but it was either Shem or one of his descendants, according to the ancient tradition, that they killed Nimrod. They hacked his body up into little pieces and spread it all over the land of Shinar, which should have ended the worship of Nimrod. But Nimrod's wife, Semiramis, would not let the kingdom, the empire, slip through her fingers so readily. And so she said that Nimrod really didn't die. Nimrod ascended into heaven and has now become the sun god. Now, in order to make all of this work, Semiramis then made priests of the people, and they made rules and regulations that the people had to follow. And the priest that she put in place then divided up the year into 4 quadrants. The winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, December 25th at the time, the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, and the vernal and autumnal equinoxes, the days of the year of equal daylight and equal darkness. Winter solstice, summer solstice, vernal, autumnal equinox, amen. And so, the priest of Easter put in place this entire religious system in which now Nimrod is worshipped as a god. Now, quite a while after Nimrod was dead and ascended into heaven, according to this Babylonian sun worship tradition, Semiramis became pregnant. But not in the way that most people become pregnant. She said that the rays of the sun, her dead husband Nimrod, has impregnated her, and now she is going to give birth to Nimrod, reincarnated as the sun god upon the earth. And when he was born, they named him little baby Tammuz, and he was born on December 25th, the time of the winter solstice on the ancient Babylonian calendar. Now, little baby Tammuz was supposed to be the reincarnated sun god, and you would expect that if he were really a god, he would be able to live forever, right? But that's not the case. Little baby Tammuz turned into a man, and in his 40th year, he was gored to death by a wild boar, a pig, in a freak hunting accident, and he was killed. And so, the worshipers of the sun god then set aside 40 days of weeping for Tammuz, 1 day for each year of his life. And in these 40 days of weeping for Tammuz, they would start out with this wild party the day before, and then they would have 40 days in which they would deny themselves a pleasure in this life for the pleasure of Tammuz in his afterlife. Now, what happened at this period of time is that Yahweh looked down to the earth and saw what was going on the earth, that men were all of one language. There was all sorts of perversion that was going on. These people were worshiping Nimrod, the reincarnated baby Tammuz. I mean, it was a mess. And so what happened at that time is that he looked down and saw that if everyone stays of the same language, there is no amount of evil that's going to be held from these people. You know, they are going to bear totalitarian rule over the entire earth. Everyone will be enslaved. Everyone will be completely polluted with the worship of these false gods. And so he made a decision to confuse the languages at Babel. And so Babylon became known as the word for confusion. Now, when he confused the languages, he many years later made the statement that he confused the languages so that he would, and he divided the nations according to the number of the sons of Israel. Well, at the time that he confused the languages, there were no sons of Israel. They were not going to be born for hundreds of years. But what he was telling us is that he confused the languages. He divided up the one world global empire of Nimrod, scattered the people because he had a plan that he would choose a people who would be his priest, who would be his prophets, who would be his spokesman to the entire world. And until they arrived on the scene, the best thing that could be done is to confuse the languages of the people and send them scattered throughout the face of the earth, and they became known as the 70 nations that came out of that confusion of languages at Babylon. Now is where the story gets interesting, because now all these people have gotten all of this intricate worship pattern that they learned from the priest of Nimrod and Tammuz, and the languages were confused, and so they were scattered all over the earth. And that's why when Israel was in Egypt, we worshiped Ra right along with the Egyptians. We got polluted just like the Egyptians did. We ate what the Egyptians ate. We smoked what the Egyptians smoked. We lived in the fairy tale dream world of the pagan gods that they manufactured, and the main god of Egypt was Ra, who was born on December 25th. Now, we leave Egypt and we go through the land of the Moabites. We're right next to where the Ammonites live. We're to go in to take over the land of the Canaanites, and we find out that all of their gods were born on December 25th. Moloch, Chemosh, and Tammuz. Many years later, the Greeks came in and occupied the land of Israel, and they worshiped Jupiter and Zeus, who were both born on December 25th. Later, the Romans came in and took over the land of Israel. They worshiped Mithra, who was born on December 25th. All of these things have to do with Babylonian sun god worship that came right straight out of Babylon, but was confused by the names of the gods because the languages were confused, but the worship ceremonies stayed the same. So now, let's go back to Chemosh and Moloch, because we remember from the scriptures, remember that Ruth, she was a Moabite, and she worshiped the gods of the Moabites. She worshiped Chemosh, the god of the Moabites. And we see that the worship of Chemosh went something like this. And all we have are the records and the traditions that have remained in the cultures that we now see today. And so a lot of these things, like Semiramis, Nimrod's wife, in some cultures she's called Beltis. But it's the same person. It's just that the languages were confused. And so a lot of these traditions are still embedded in the cultures of the East. And so what I'm about to tell you is like a composite of what we now know, and we can go back to those times, and we can go back to these cultures and see how they did their child sacrifice and how they did their worship. So let me tell you a little bit about Chemosh. Chemosh was a cast iron, pot-bellied god. And because it was an agricultural society, and the people believed that their crops for the next year, of which they depended upon to live, were dependent upon the blessing of these gods, they would go so far as to make long lists of what they wanted in the coming year, and they would write down these long lists to present to their god Chemosh. And then at the time of the winter solstice, this is when they would present their long list of their wish list to Chemosh, and they would present it to him, but they didn't go empty-handed. First of all, Chemosh, being a big pot-bellied cast iron god, they would then, the priest of Chemosh would from the back stoke up Chemosh and turn the entire pot-bellied god into a cherry red furnace. He was completely red from head to toe. And then the people would recite their list as they stood before the cherry red pot-bellied god, who had his hands out like this, and his hands were cherry red, and they would then take their children and put them in the hands of this god and incinerate their little babies in the hands of Chemosh on December 25th. That was called the child mass. Mass means sacrifice, and that was the high day of child sacrifice in which people would put their children in the hands of the cherry red, pot-bellied god of prosperity and give it as an offering to Chemosh for the blessing of Chemosh in the coming year. That is what the pagan sun god worship was about, and that's why Yahweh said, do not learn the way of the heathen, for they've offered their children to other gods. They've burnt their children in the fires. Don't learn how they worship their gods. Do not do these things and learn the way of the heathen and say you're doing it for me. He said it's an abomination. But yet we see that the worship system of Babylon has been inculcated into every single society on planet Earth today. The confusion of languages did disseminate the worship of Nimrod in Tammuz and Chemosh and Molech and Ra and Jupiter and Zeus and Mithra and Santa Claus. But it's the same God that is worshiped. The God that inspired Babylon. The God that the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament, says that Satan is the god of this world. And it was Satan who came to Yeshua and offered him all the kingdoms, all the power, all the glory of this world, because he said, it has been delivered unto me, and whomsoever I will, I give it. And so we see it goes all the way back to who really inspired things at Babylon. And we were told to have nothing to do with it. So, young lady, you are exactly right. There is no Santa Claus that comes down the chimney. All of these are traditions that came out of Babylon, and they kept on changing in different cultures. But this is one of these traditions that Yahweh said, do not learn the way the heathen do their things. Do not worship their gods, the god of prosperity, the way that the heathen do, and say you're doing it for me. It's an abomination. Now some people will say, oh, that's not what Santa Claus is all about. But, you know, all we have to do is go down to the shopping mall for the last weeks before Christmas, right? Go down there, and who do they have sitting on his throne? A cherry red, pot-bellied god of prosperity that children come up and sit in the lap of Chemosh, and they present their list of what they want for Christmas, for the child mass. It's like their parents are now having their children present it as they sit in the lap of this cherry red god of prosperity. But we no longer incinerate little babies in the hands of Santa Claus, do we? That's not done anymore. What they do in America is they abort millions of babies all year long so that there is not the additional financial strain on whoever was going to have the baby. And then on December 25th, they all give gifts to each other to celebrate the prosperity that they just charged up on their charge cards. Now, right after everyone gets through charging their credit cards to the limit, then they have everyone get before the Christmas tree, which we read about in the scriptures. It says that in Jeremiah, it says, do not be dismayed at the heathen. Don't follow the heathen, for they do this. they cut a tree out of the woods, the work of a workman with an axe. They fasten the tree with hammer and nails so that it doesn't topple over, and then they deck it with gold and silver balls. They deck it with gold and silver. This is exactly how Ra was worshipped. Now, in our culture, in Israel, we started to use evergreen trees, what's called the groves, which we were told to cut down all the groves and to get rid of them. But these groves of evergreen trees is what we did in Israel, but in Egypt, they actually used a palm tree. They decked it with gold and silver balls, which represents the testicles of Ra, and then the children get on their hands and knees, and then they take their presents out from under the tree, or they give their presents to the pagan god underneath the tree. This was done thousands of years ago. And in America, as less than 250 years ago, on this continent, it was illegal to have a Christmas tree because the pilgrims who escaped from the pagan sun god worship that became inculcated into the Roman Empire in their religious system, the pilgrims who came over knew that it was pagan sun god worship. In fact, if you had your church doors open on Christmas Day, the pastor would be put in jail. It was illegal in America because the people who founded America, who came to get their freedom out of Europe, came over here at the risk of their life. They had been tortured to death. They had been killed. Their tongues had been pulled out and cut off because they spoke out against the Roman Church that had brought in all this pagan sun god worship into it through Constantine. Now, when we took a stand on this continent, we said that we are going to separate ourselves. We are going to get free from Mystery Babylon. We are coming out of Babylon. We are going to set up on this nation, and we are going to found this nation upon everyone's ability to govern themselves according to the commandments of Yahweh. And that's where America started out. But because very few people are teaching righteousness, and everyone is into the cherry red pot-bellied God of prosperity, no one is telling the truth anymore. But since you asked, this is a good time to know the truth. Because when you know the truth sets you free from every man-made religion on the planet. Do you know that when we know the truth, and we know that we only have to obey Yahweh, that at that point, we don't have to follow any of the rules and regulations that men set up to govern their religious systems. And we are set completely free. So now that you've taken the red pill, now that you know the truth, now we can go back to Sinai and recognize the first commandment. Yahweh is our Elohim. We are to have no other gods before him, no other gods in his face. And we are not to learn the way of the heathen. And that is why what we celebrate is the only winter festival that we read about in the New Testament, the only festival that Yeshua kept in the wintertime in Jerusalem, and that is the Feast of Hanukkah. Because Hanukkah is a celebration of deliverance from pagan sun god worship. And so now, this will be the last time that we sit here in front of this fire, because now you know that Santa Claus, there's no such thing. When we trace it all the way back, this cherry red suit represents Satan and the sacrifice of innocent children. It represents the worship of pagan gods. It represents those people who do not know the Elohim, the creator of the universe. They are without God and without hope in this world, and we are to be the ones who are his priests, his prophets, the ones that tell the whole world the truth about the worship of the true God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so now you know the rest of the story.